So, how many of us shoe a horse that has a perfect pair of front feet that are symmetrical? Even if they're close to it, it's so remarkable that we actually mention it, or we think about it. And yet, all these foals are born like that. So understanding why the hoof changes might help us with mature horses. This is a foal that has a normal conformation, and this is about a month old, and you'll see when it walks back to us, yes, the toes point out by about 3 degrees. So what would that tell us about the loading of this foal? It would tell us that we shouldn't be surprised that loading is more medially than lateral. And therefore, even at this age, they are uneven, their loading. So what is that doing? That is pushing that inside up, but it's also pushing the outside outwards. Something a little bit more complex, and so this is normal healthy development. Here, we have a foal with a flexural deformity. Not quite severe enough maybe to call ballerina syndrome, but certainly this foal is loading its dorsum, its toe, and not loading its heel. In fact, we're shuffling it backwards and forwards to try and get it to put weight on its heel. The foot on the other side, the dark foot, doesn't look quite as bad. So they're not often a perfect pair, but it is a condition of both front legs. You can only see this if you look at foals on a hard surface, and that's what thoroughbred stud farms do. If you rear foals and you only ever look at them in a paddock or in a barn, you will never see it, because they're only a couple of mils or an eighth of an inch off the ground. Some of them are actually bearing weight on the ground that we found, and they look like they're purely bearing weight, but we can see they're not. So this is not the loading pattern of this foal. This is another one with a flexural deformity, and you can see it's only bearing weight at the dorsum, whereas its other foot by now is fairly correct in its loading. So what about breed and the environment? Well, we know breed is different. This is a thoroughbred that I'm trimming, and I'm trimming it because it has had an abscess about 3 months before, and now it's gone and got another one. It's actually, and I only realised that today, is actually the younger sister of the foal that you saw. But look at this. This is a very typical thoroughbred foot. It's as wide as it is long. I'm only trimming it because that's what I do if I'm looking for an abscess. It seems to me if you trim the foot, you've got a cleaner foot to look at, and you're closer to the abscess. So I'm trimming it, but I'm really putting it on here for 2 reasons. For you to see the shape of this very typical thoroughbred foot, and look at the paddock it's standing in. That's an English thoroughbred stud farm paddock, as it would be in Kentucky. Although you know Kentucky, they always talk about the bluegrass. I've been there in January, February, July. In January and February they say you come at the wrong time, it's all burnt off by frost. You go in July and they say you come at the wrong time, it's all burnt off by the sun. I say, am I ever going to get to see this bluegrass? Tell me the week that it's blue and I'll come and have a look. But anyway, lush grass, so a different environment to this. This is an Andalusian in Andalusia, in southern Spain, arid. Almost, Andalusia almost touches the Sahara Desert. It's a very arid, dry climate. And we can see that this hoof shape is very typical of the Andalusians. They have a steep dorsal wall, and they have a narrow, almost contracted foot. Captain Horace Hayes noted that when English thoroughbreds in about 1880 were exported to Australia, that their hooves narrowed and their pastern came up. So I think, although many of us are stuck in our own environment, we usually, wherever we shoot, have a variety, or at least some variation in environment. But it is noted that environment does affect hoof shape, and I've tried to show in here also that breed does affect hoof shape. And we shouldn't try and make the thoroughbred like an Andalusian or the reverse. We have to understand our breed differences. So now I'll get this to move on. All right, so this is an unevenly loaded hoof, and we can see we're getting very uneven growth, medial lateral. So now I've told you that I believe that horn is generated evenly at the primary back, but loading is different and compression is different. You might view this foot differently and say it's not because it's not growing as much foot one side, or not generating as much, It is that in the descent of that horn down the hoof wall, the hoof is being compressed more on one side. That's what's changing the hoof shape. If we look at this yearling of about 18 months of age, this is a fairly normal, healthy hoof for a thoroughbred and fairly normal angle. Here we clearly see a clubfoot. So the question is it that this hoof is growing more at the heel, or is it compressing more at the toe? Now all of us, I think, and myself included, always looked at a clubfoot and thought, well, it's a clubfoot because the heel's growing far more than the toe. Or the heel's growing fast and the toe is growing normally. It may not be true, and it might be a mixture of the both. So it might be unloading the heel, so that's growing quicker, and it might be loading the toe, and as you can now see, that will compress the hoof more. So that gives us a little bit more understanding of what's going on when we get a different hoof shape between left and right. So what about this, where we have an upright foot, or is it a club foot? So this is definitely a club foot, and for me this is an upright foot. And nothing annoys me more, in fact I have to constrain myself from violence and snapping people when they talk to me about an upright club foot. They are two different hooves, and they're caused by two different things, and the only thing they have in common is yet again that steep dorsal wall. That's the only thing in common between this and the previous picture I showed you. So why does a horse get an upright foot? There's usually two explanations. One is that there is a limb length difference, and that's fine by me, because we get that in people. And if it's not loading this leg as much, this hoof is desperately trying to grow down at the ground to get some even loading between the limbs. And we know that with upright feet because if you get somebody aggressively trim this, it'll actually collapse this one more. The other explanation is that it's had an injury at some point in its life on this side, and because it hasn't loaded that limb as much, it's either been non-weight bearing or partial weight bearing, that hoof has contracted and it has become more upright. And I think that's a fair estimation as well. This one I don't know because I don't know the history of the horse. I'm going to show you one where I knew the history and we saw what happened. So what's happening with the club foot? Well, we saw that fold with flexural deformity pulling on that tendon and standing on the toe. So why should we be surprised that if it does that for any period of time? My Bachelor of Science study showed that on average it only took 43 days to create a club foot. On average. I mean, some of them might be created in 25 or 30 days. That's why you have to work quickly on those, because they will rapidly get a club foot. Why should we be surprised when we can see this tendon tension and the heel off the ground, that in short time we get this? We get the hoof becoming concave, we get sometimes tearing away of the hoof wall, we get changes to the distal phalanx, and we get a higher heel. This heel is not underloading, it's trying to grow down quickly and meet the ground. So this is a 3-year-old thoroughbred that fractured its pastern, and it did that about 9 months before this picture, maybe 8 months, and you can tell that because you can actually see the line there that marks the day this horse got injured, because we know that events in a horse's life are marked by quite conspicuous hoof growth rings. So we're trimming up on the stud farm, it's finished in training and it's going to become a broodmare. And you can see here the difference a little bit in these hooves, and you can see it here. This is a relatively normal thoroughbred angle and hoof, and here we can see it's more upright than you would expect. So I measured this one because this was last year and I already got into this. And again, I'm going to convert for you. This is 12.5 centimetres. This is very fortunate. That's bang on 5 inches. A friend of mine did a study of thoroughbreds in training, and at 3 years old, they average a hoof width of 4 7/8 inches. So this is just a fraction wider than the average at that age. But look here, this is 11 centimetres, so that's 15 mil less, which if I can convert is somewhere around 5/8 of an inch difference. Now, all hooves, as we've discussed, all front hooves differ left to right, but not by that amount. So I can't tell you the earlier history of this, but I can be pretty sure it never had that much difference. That difference has been created in 8 to 9 months because of the uneven loading, because of that injury. And that injury is repaired. This is now a sound horse. How much will this recover? Well, depending on how much equal loading, the loading becomes more equalised. My experience is they never recover 100%. Once they've distorted that much, they are like that for life. There might be some improvement, but they're like it for quite a long time. Human intervention. My second year Henry, having a quick trim here. We've got to remember that as farriers, we affect hoof shape. We choose sometimes to trim hooves in a particular way. Sometimes we're influenced by fads. Sometimes we all have, just like handwriting, idiosyncratic ways of trimming. So all of us would trim a little bit different. I have a guy who works for me, and he, when I say I round the hoof off, I round it off. He sort of does a square rim all the way around. And he's been qualified for a long time, and I sort of just try and talk him around every now and again. He carries on doing it. So that's an idiosyncratic difference. So this is quite an old picture. This was a very famous stallion, and if you can't, experiment on $5 million horses, what can you expect? So this was sort of at the time of the 4-point trim. And if you can see, I've tried a 4-point trim on here. I've trimmed back the quarters. You can see it's not loading under the quarters. And I left the other foot there. Thank God they're not very observant on this stud farm. And this would be my type of trim. I just follow what I would consider to be the natural outline of the hoof, and I really round it off from heel to heel. And so you can see this difference in shape, and I would have to say I still look at this a bit and think it's a fairly ugly shape. I do agree with this sort of cut, that preserving the dorsal wall, and yet actually bringing back that breakover at times, that's a very useful thing to do. So this is a 10-month-old foal that was shown to me 2 years ago now, getting ready for the sales. It had, again, which is quite rare, though I've shown you 2 examples, fetlock pelvis. So in other words, it angles out from the fetlock. You can see the other front leg here, and you can see this distortion. So 10 months now this is. You can't see it so much there. You get just a little bit of a hint of that distortion. You can see it there. And now if you look at the bottom of the foot, you can just see how grossly distorted it is. Now Elizabeth Rowland, a researcher here in the US, showed that actually hooves are not symmetrical. They are wider on the lateral side. But how much wider than the medial side is it okay? I think this one is way beyond what's okay. So when I say to trim a hoof symmetrically, what I'm really saying is almost symmetrical. You know, there's just 1 or 2 mils, an eighth of an inch difference. And that's been shown scientifically. The problem is, if we tell people it's fine to be wider laterally, we actually get some people who end up shoeing and trimming like this. But I just wanted to show that sort of gross distortion. Now this is 10 months old. We're too late to change this. And so, however well we trim this, and I hope we can improve it, it's always going to be quite grossly distorted. It's always going to be way out of balance, too wide on the lateral side. So I want to make that clear that sometimes people get a bit hung up about symmetry. And so when I'm saying symmetry, I'm not daft enough to say that that hoof is always and should be, 100% symmetrical. It isn't. But I think it's relatively close to symmetry. In other words, it's symmetrical enough to often only just fall on our eyes. All right, this is Blue. It's a teaser. I'm sure you don't all know what a teaser is. On stud farms, you cannot risk your valuable stallion on your mare if your mare is not ready, because at best she will kick the stallion in the chest, and at worst she'll kick him somewhere which will put him out of action for quite a while. So you get these ponies, God bless them, that do that job. And so they tease the mare. And this little pony on this stud farm, which was a small enough stud farm, used to have about, well, still does have about 20 mares, 15 foals, 15 years. And every day in the season, Blue is marched out, and every day he thinks he's going to get sex. Every day, he thinks it. He wouldn't do his job if he didn't believe it. So I say it's a little bit like getting old, Anyway. So here's Blue, pony, Oh my goodness, look at these hooves, beautiful hooves. But you can see his conformation, toes out a bit base narrow. So I didn't do much above my folds. In my couple of years studying my folds, I was so busy on it. But you know, you can't help occasionally having a little bit of a play. I got this kit in the back of my van, and we had an afternoon free, and we just thought, I would see what we can do. So we put blue on there. Here's the first thing. He was not trimmed as a natural balance trim, but he does wear his toes a bit. Look, no weight bearing at the toe. Just to see the frog on here, this frog isn't on the ground. Relatively even weight bearing around there. Okay, I've forgotten. I'm going to show you tomorrow what happens when we play about with him, because it's quite interesting. All right, bull-nose shape. This is a foal which was lame on this hind leg, and at a very early age, 2 months, was already getting this dome shape. So that's why I took the picture, and I took the picture last year already thinking about this lecture, because I've been quite interested about bull-nosed, and I think you've already seen an example today of this. So we see this shape here. This is not Farrier induced. Only this last ½ inch is rasping. This has a curvature here. We can see that it's grossly broken back, a negative hoof axis. And if we look at the radiograph, we can see that this, the solar plane of the distal phalanx, which should be at about 3 to 5 degrees, is probably that in reverse. So it's a negative angle. And tomorrow, of course, I'm going to show you how I deal with that. But the interesting thing here is this curvature. This has remained parallel. So this horn has been bent. So this is a plastic deformation due to this conformation. Of course, it's always interesting, the chicken and the egg, what is coming first. Is it this conformation that's causing the curve, or is it this curve and this that's causing this conformation? So we'll look again at that tomorrow. I said laterality, I don't think has been discussed enough, which is just a term for one-sidedness. But it's not quite as simple as the fact that horses are 3 or 4 to 1 right-sided. We hear about 8 to 1 right-sided, so we're more dominantly right-sided than horses. Lots of people think horses are left-sided. I'll tell you why they think that, because they lead with their left leg. That is not the dominant leg. You know, were I to be an Olympic long jumper, and I know I'm asking you for an even bigger leap of imagination to think about that, I would jump with my right leg, because I'm right-sided, but I would stick my left leg out. So lead and dominant leg is not the same thing. But it gets a little bit more complicated than that, because like a lot of people, although I'm right-sided, if you put a sledgehammer in my hand, or an axe, or, God forbid, a cricket bat, which, as I was explaining to somebody last night, cricket is just a refined and sophisticated version of baseball, really. But if you put a bat in my hand, I bat left-handed. I strike left-handed. Lots of people do that. When they go two-handed, they suddenly work right-handed. And you don't even know that until it was pointed out to me. I didn't know that. So you think how much more complex it is with a horse using 4 legs. So laterality is quite a complex thing about how there's this interaction between dominant leg and not. But we do know that laterality causes a difference in the hoof angle, because Mika van der Giel studied that with her PhD on Dutch warm bloods in about 2004. That's what she did a PhD on. And she could show that you could, if you recorded the way the foal put its foot, which leg it put forward, you could also correlate that with the difference in angle. So that definitely lateralization does have has an effect, especially on hoof angle. It probably has different effects. What about wear? I said about wear. This is an Arabian stallion. He was the fastest Arabian racehorse in Europe for a few years. I learned something, coming from the thoroughbred background, is that he was the fastest Arabian, so they had a job finding a horse to exercise with him. Even finding the slowest thoroughbred they could find, he still struggled to keep up with it. That's the difference between Arabians and thoroughbreds. The other thing is, Arabians were put on this earth to convince people like me that there are stupider horses than thoroughbreds. Sorry, Arabian people, but I did a big Arabian stud farm for a long time. Anyway, this poor old boy, you know, because we don't have much call for it, so he's a stallion. And they only put him next to a paddock of thoroughbred mares. And you can see he doesn't have great conformation despite that great winning record. Toes in a little bit and running up and down on a sandy soil, he really wore these hooves. And when I looked at them, I thought, this is a Mustang roll. Here in England, a Mustang roll. And you know, I'm a very open-minded person, and you know, I know there's lots of sects and cults and ways of trimming, and of course, the one that perhaps we all got upset about, and quite rightly, was Strasser. But you know, I'm an open-minded person. I tried the Strasser technique. And you can see I just forgot to trim one of them. So there are lots of cults of trimming and shoeing, and that's human intervention. And often, you know, the ones that you shouldn't try, the ones that claim that they are the universal truth, that is the one way. So I think we have to trim horses as individuals and for the environment that they're in. But there's laterality, human laterality as well. And you can see an example of right-hand trimming and left-hand trimming. And I think the best farriers early on learn to trim left and right. It can still be shown up. A study by Kuma, who was another one of the guys at Utrecht, showed that farriers do tend to trim left-handed or right-handed. Upset a lot of farriers, but we have to accept the truth of it. Why should we be surprised? We just have to be aware of it and try not to do it. And I think the best way, you know, I was made to trim left and right-handed. And when I'm trimming, I can't tell you whether I'm trimming left or right-handed because I just swap hands. And all my young guys do the same. And within a year, they do the same thing. If you say you're using your left hand or your right, they don't know what you're talking about. They just trim left and right. So that's the best guide. All right, neglect changes hoof shape. This one isn't really neglected. It's been freshly trimmed. But it has a grass crack, and grass cracks are often the start of changes, and they're a sign even when they're mild like that. Well, this is grossly distorted, and this definitely neglect. I don't know how well it was shod to start with. Obviously a farrier that took a lot of trouble to make this aluminum shoe, but this has been on 12 weeks. And so we know that. The best shoeing job in the world looks awful in 12 weeks' time. Every other craft on earth leaves a trace, whether it's blacksmith, leaving beautifully forged stuff, Chippendale, and ladies, I am talking about the carpenter, not the dance troupe. Chippendale, you can still look at this furniture. It's the most beautiful furniture in the world. Great architects leave buildings behind. What do we leave? In 6 weeks' time, nobody knows whether we showed a horse well or not. So it's an interesting difference. If we look at this is obviously a step up from this one, and at this point, although it's not grossly long, this needs careful trimming. So the farrier hasn't caused this, but maybe he might be able to change it. And this, of course, is another example of gross distortion. This was a picture sent to me by Chris Pollock many years ago. So this is French shoeing, this is Australian trimming. So I should have said there's a national effect on hoof shape. I'll bring out all my prejudices. Okay, injury also causes hoof shape change, of course. And you can't much see the difference in the hoof shape of this, but you can probably see that this had a really nasty wire cut injury. Quite unusual.